Well, good evening and welcome to Lower Makefield Township Ad Hoc Property Committee meeting. My name is Dennis Stedman. We have a quorum of the committee and extended shareholders as well as cattails on our call this evening. But we're very pleased that everyone could join in. We have a meeting agenda. I'm going to share my screen to go to that agenda. Okay. And so I would like to call the meeting to order. We appreciate everyone's time tonight. On the agenda, in addition to approval of the minutes of our last March meeting, we're focused, I hope everyone knows, our assignment from Lower Makefield Township is to create a master plan for the Patterson Farm. We'll give an update on that, as you can see in item 3. And then we'll obviously have time for a public comment period. As an introduction, we have a subcommittee on community outreach and engagement, and we'll hear from Fred Childs from that subcommittee later in the meeting. But they, I thought, did a good job of trying to define the problem associated with that created this committee and define the solution. So I'd like to open our meeting with kind of that comment or overview, if I could. The problem, as is certainly I understand, and I think I know the committee understands, is basically is as follows. The buildings on Patterson Farm are currently at a crossroads. Many of those buildings are unused, and many of those unused buildings are in major disrepair, and which is why so many of them are locked up, because they are unsafe for anyone to enter at this time. They will also be expensive to repair and maintain, particularly the historic buildings, which come obviously with their own set of challenges and expenses, but all the buildings are old. If the township, the owner of the property, doesn't act soon, the repair costs are only going to increase, and the risk, which we want to avoid, is that some buildings may not be salvageable. So we're at a crossroads. This problem, it translates to the township, to Lower Makefield residents and Lower Makefield taxpayers, because even cursory estimates are clear. To salvage all of the historical buildings and bring them into a usable condition, millions of dollars will have to be invested in the Patterson Farm old buildings. If so, which ones? With what priority should they be tackled? And if they are, if there is millions of dollars invested, how to put those buildings to a good use? Because, as we've said many times, a building without a use is dead. It can't be maintained. So there's no sense in investing significantly in historic or old buildings and not have a use for them when the investment is over. That problem is particularly acute, I feel, because this township, this community, does have a commitment to historic preservation. And there are historic buildings on this valuable Patterson Farm. And there is also a commitment to keep Patterson Farm in farming, as it has been for over 300 years. That's not a question. Most of the land is in agricultural preserved easements and will stay in farming. Right now, the problem at Patterson Farm is not farming. It's being productively used by a very high quality local tenant farmer. The problem is the buildings. So Lower Makefield decided before making such major investments in any buildings, we need to know how those buildings will be used to the benefit of the community in order to support their long run maintenance and survival. Seems very appropriate decision to make. So the solution is to part of the solution was Lower Makefield formed this committee, the Ad Hoc Property Committee, to analyze the condition of the buildings, potential expenses associated with them, and recommendations for potential future uses. The summary of those recommendations were presented in March of 22, and they include 3 items. Patterson Farm should remain in agriculture, as I just said, top priority. The historical buildings should be preserved where possible, and historically important. They are historically important, but also important to the character and the culture and the aesthetic beauty of Lower Makefield Township. And without a use, a building dies. It can't be maintained. So the third element of those recommendations is to identify productive uses, reuses, so that these buildings can bring some utility to the community, some value to the community to support their maintenance. And with the exception of 2 or 3 small outbuildings, the barns and other outbuildings are certainly obsolete as farm buildings. They were built a long time ago when agriculture looked a whole lot different. Those barns in particular are obsolete by today's standards. So what this committee has done with the approval of funding by the township is based on a public RFP, request for proposals. We conducted a review of outside agencies and recommended the hiring of Seller Drury Architecture, and the Board of Supervisors approved that in March of 2023. This consulting architectural firm, very knowledgeable local firm familiar with Bucks County, will conduct engineering, architectural site reviews, evaluate alternative building uses, propose designs as input to a master plan. The master plan will include building uses and the estimated costs to make those buildings suitable to those uses. Obviously, how the building is to be used will impact its cost of repair, restoration, what have you. Also, the cost associated with site infrastructure. And by doing that, we can make intelligent investment decisions, most likely in a staged fashion. Part of that master planning process is we do seek community input on potential uses, as well as input on the magnitude of the investment dollars that the community is willing to spend to save these buildings. Obviously, without any monetary constraints, everyone would say save every building regardless. And my heart and many hearts are in favor of that. The reality is money is not limitless, and so decisions will have to be made to get to that better point. So that's the problem and the solution. And we are in today, here in April, we're going to have, hopefully, after we resolve some technical difficulties, Doug Seller of Seller Drury Architecture will be joining us and giving us an update on this project. They are fully engaged, and we'll look at a timeline and progress report on their work. And that's the main job of this committee, is to manage this project and deliver a master plan to the township that can guide this decision making. Hopefully we can do that by September. It's ambitious, but we're going to give it a good shot. I would ask the committee members and our fellow stakeholders who are present is any comments, questions, expansions that you would like to offer on this kind of high level summary of what the problems are and the path that we're on for a solution. Any at all?
But it was well said. I think you presented it well.
Thank you, John. Also, I failed to mention part of this solution is early on we hired a skilled expert architect and project manager, Jennifer Stark, and Jennifer's on all our meetings. And Jennifer, you have any observations or comments at this juncture?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Thanks for being here. So with that, I'd like to turn the meeting over to our secretary. Beth, could you move us forward for the approval of our March minutes?
Right, you're on mute.
Beth, are you on mute?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry. Yes, the meeting minutes and draft were sent out to all of the committee members a couple weeks ago. If there are any changes, we'll open it up for discussion. If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Motion to approve. Second it.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Beth. On the Patterson Farm master plan update, I'd like to reorganize this agenda just a bit. Item A, fiscal responsibility. I think the natural flow would be to let that come at the end as item D. So Fred, could I ask that we jump into the next topic B, the Community Outreach and Engagement Subcommittee?
Okay. Last week, we had a subcommittee meeting. We had some discussion with Bill Collins of Seiler Drury on their thoughts in terms of how to engage the community and get some public input. We had a good discussion with him and waiting for some more information tonight to see where they are in terms of scheduling some of the meetings. They talked about in-person and remote possibilities, presentations to interested community members, and also and possibly some interactive open forum meetings. So we'll develop that as it goes, and we'll hear from Doug tonight, I think, what their intention is in the near future. Talked about some focus groups, identifying how to reach out to specific groups within the community that already exist, including the immediate neighbors who may be most immediately impacted. And part of that discussion we had with the township members, that they are going to put together a letter to some of the immediately local neighbors and to get their inputs, but also to notify them that information is going to be available both on the website now and as the township continues to expand that information for people's interest on the website. And also just to let them know that there will be meetings coming up in the next several weeks or months to get some input from them. As I said, the website is up and running from the township that gives basic information on some of the background as far as the farm goes and the current plan for developing a master plan. We also talked about developing a survey in conjunction with the consultant Seiler Drury, and we've drafted some initial questions, and that's still in development. We've had a lot of feedback back and forth within the committee, so we'll be developing that along with the township and pursuing that in conjunction with the consultant to reach out to the community to get more input on their thoughts on the farm and where they think they'd like to see some of the buildings, what developments may be of interest to people in the community. So I think that we're looking forward to setting up and scheduling the public input meetings and that process. So I think we'll like to hear from Doug tonight and see where they're where they stand in terms of that planning.
Great. Should I consider that an introduction, Fred, for me to start talking, Dennis?
Yeah, yes, almost just a follow-up for Fred, quick. Fred, could you, and if you're not the right one to do it, could someone else give just a very clear direction to any listener, what website you're talking about, where do they go?
It's on the lmt.org website, and there is a page for Patterson Farm. Jim, maybe you can give us the exact URL address for it.
LMT website. Jim might be on mute if he's.
So it's under the community links, and that'll take you to that page as he's showing on the screen.
Okay.
And that also links to a number of the documents that have been done, our recommendations, the master plan proposal by Seiler Drury, the Avison Young master plan management proposal, your slides from the presentation on November of last year, and the Board of Supervisors news release in terms of the contract to Seiler Drury. And then there's a number of studies and presentations that have been made over the last 10 years that are also listed there for people's interest if they want to delve in a little more details of the background on the farm and the properties there.
And you could also reach that from the ad hoc committee page under boards and commissions. So if you look at the ad hoc committee page, we do have on there the link directly back to the Patterson Farm page. So as we continue to progress and add information, stuff like meeting dates, everyone could just click on that link or the one under community and get to the page for the Patterson Farm with some background information.
Thank you, Jim.
Great. Yeah, that's important. There's a lot of factual information available about Patterson Farm, its history, and the work of this committee and others prior to it. So I'd encourage anyone to make themselves available to that information. Anything else?
One last thing, just remembered, we are also working on along with the township, in particular, the frequently asked questions, so that, try to respond to a lot of questions that have come up already, and that'll be posted once we finalize that document.
Okay. Very good. Very good. Any other questions, discussion around the subcommittee for community outreach and engagement? Thank you, Fred. The Ron Schmidt, who heads that group up, is is unable to join us tonight, but appreciate it, Fred. Good job. Next on the agenda, yes, Doug, you are up. And am I still? I should not share my screen anymore, should I?
Well, I was hoping, Dennis, that you might be able to share that schedule, the project schedule that
okay. Well, you tell me when you want me to do that, and I shall.
You might. Well, let me just say before you do share it, it's inspiring to be involved in this project. It's a very exciting place and process. I apologize for being such a small person here in this conference room. My personal computer link wasn't working, so I'm a tiny dot in a dark room, and my apologies. We have started the project, and we've sort of integrated where we are to date and the discussions to date about public meetings and the different tasks, which sort of break into a few phases of work, which I thought I'd use the schedule to summarize for everybody what those are, just as sort of an overview. But as a general statement, Dennis's opening statement document, the last page, really describes what we're trying to flesh out, which is the buildings, their potential uses, and from a physical building characteristics point of view and an economic viability point of view, what those costs are and what it involves, so that you all can make the decisions that Dennis alluded to. So you might just pull that schedule up, Dennis, and I'll just use it to talk for a few minutes, and then field questions as people no doubt will have them. If in the perfect world we get the full screen of that.
Yeah, no, I'm in the process. Okay. Are you seeing that?
Yes, and maybe you can shrink its size. Is there a zoom out button somewhere?
There is.
We might need to zoom.
I can scroll. I can scroll. If we make it too small, it won't be legible. So you tell me when it's right.
Yeah, we can kind of. That's good. I think we have it. That's the whole schedule. So
Okay.
I can kind of review for people what's represented here, and there's numbered boxes on the left side, left column, and then this. I'm going to just describe what you see here, and then I imagine this will be available on that site that Jim alluded to. I imagine, and but let me just describe it to you in general terms. So there's 5 tasks involved in this, which are the one that we've started now, which we kicked off at the last ad hoc meeting a month ago, sort of hit the ground on March 31st with interviews of stakeholder groups. That's that's essentially line 4, I would say. It kind of started there, Dennis. And we met on the 31st with a group of people out there, an all-day session beginning with the Artists of Yardley people with Bet, met with Colleen Otera at the caretaker's house, discussed sort of her view of things. We spent time with Sam and Tim Stewart of Charland Farms, met with the township departments with Jim and Dave and others at the township, Public Works, Parks and Rec. We met with Joe Camerata representing the Historic Commission, and Steve Klein, essentially chatting about the mission of the Harb, although of course this site's not within your Harb boundary. That was attended by 3 of the 4 key consultants that were assembled for this project. You all might remember the project began as a master plan for the buildings, which I raised my hand for as a preservation architect, and have a soft spot for these. But I wanted to bring with our team 3 other people. One is landscape architect, master planner Simone Collins. That's Bill Collins that Fred alluded to, who puts the buildings in the context of how they relate to parks and how people use them in a landscape, and how the natural landscape and water flow and all those things impacted. Another one is Bob Powers, who's a regionally powerhouse historic preservation specialist who can make sure that we get chronologies and material descriptions right. The chronology that's been assembled to date seems quite excellent to me. There have been 2, as you know, National Register nominations made that describe a lot about these buildings, the dates. But Bob Powers, his purpose really is to corroborate that and set it up so that if future funding's gone forth through different organizations that get PHMC or National Park Service review, that the groundwork is usable and not cobbled together. And then probably the most important one that's really going to answer most of the questions is a land use economist, Todd Poole, who's with a company called Forward Planning, who is quite familiar with not only rural and farm reuse, but just the use of buildings and their economic impacts in general. What he does, he describes it as it's Sim City for real. It's basically taking buildings, planning them, economically modeling them, and drawing conclusions from that. And the data that he's going to do that for, so almost everything we're doing is for Todd Poole to answer those economic questions. And then the rest of us are analyzing the buildings and the physical context of the site and their historical, cultural sort of history and the physical fabric of the buildings to see what fits in them, what's feasible from a structural load, size, anything else you can think of point of view, and give him the data to tell you what it costs and what are feasible uses based on where you are in this portion of Philadelphia. Not everything will work there. He started his process really the Monday after our interviews, which were on a Friday. And he's shared a few interesting ideas with me. He's on a timeline that to say around May 10th or so, he will have preliminary findings, kind of draft findings to start kicking around with the committee. This task 1, which is the survey of the buildings, creating base drawings, making an historic statement, understanding the site context, and Todd Poole's market analysis, phase 1, we call it. Dennis, you asked about what's phase 1, phase 2. Phase 1 is kind of what can the market bear? What does the market like to see that's appropriate? We have that task 1 ends with as I see it, a re-meeting with this group. And I've scheduled these meetings around your monthly ad hoc meeting. So we're aiming for, at the next meeting, which is ostensibly May 11th, we would present this and preliminary findings to this group with the idea that a week or so later, tentative date that I just threw out there of the 22nd, just pulling it out of the air. This has to be vetted with you all in the township, I imagine, of a first public meeting to share our preliminary findings and perhaps a summary of what came out of the discussions with the ad hoc committee. And that concept of having a task, doing it, reviewing with you all, and having a public meeting is kind of repeated for the next 3 steps. And if you can bear with me, I'll take you through those next 3 tasks, and then I'll pause and open it up for questions if that's okay. The next step, once we have findings about what's the physical, structural, cultural, whatever, any context we can think of, we start to do what we call develop the program. Sorry, I'm in a noisy conference room, but I just am. The programming to us is, what are the uses? Like not every building can take every use, but if an example of a program, if you were to consider your house, the program for your house is kitchen, dining, living room, bedroom, bathroom. It's the kind of list of things required sizes. And so we developed with Todd and mainly me as architect with a structural engineer, sort of the programs of programmable functions. And then we test those. And then that ends with an ad hoc meeting in June, public meeting soon thereafter. And then the feedback from that duality of those two meetings, we start going into physically planning, well, what's a what if, like the public and the ad hoc and our own judgment says that use A seems to be pretty good for the Satterwaith barn, for instance, or, you know, one of the garages at Patterson or the Patterson barn or any of the buildings, frankly. Then we start testing them with physical planning, like, well, how does it fit in there? What's it take? And from that, we develop the cost to do these things. So that feeds into kind of the final most important task, which is Todd Poole's market analysis phase 2. And that comes to your question from me, you know, when we've talked earlier, Dennis. Phase 1 is what's the physical community context region 1, and phase 2 is what's the economic viability for these buildings in this place and time for these uses that seem appropriate regionally and seem appropriate to the community. And we test them and say, okay, to put this use in this building, you know, and bring it to this level of use and restoration will cost X dollars. And here's the kind of performance, financial performance you can expect. And that being potentially what answers the question, what do we do here? That last task, it has an ad hoc committee in September and a public meeting, which we're visualizing is at a supervisor's level for feedback, comments, and that's really our process. So maybe I'll pause there because it's been a mouthful, but that's really kind of explains what we're doing and gives you the timeline. That's sounds good.
Thank you, Doug. Appreciate that. Questions, clarifications, it all. It helps to have you explain it because sometimes there's terminology that may not be common to everyone outside the architectural world. Jim Scott, I don't want to put you on the button, but I think I will. I know this is in your bailiwick a little more than maybe the rest of us. Thoughts, reactions, comments on this schedule and process?
I think it's well thought out. I appreciate that a lot of the nitty-gritty is being done at the front end as far as the building systems and structural, since that's going to dictate everything else, you know. So despite the best ideas, you know, let's see if it's structurally and fiscally possible. So I think that's a good plan of attack.
Great. Thank you.
So a couple questions, Doug.
Yeah, Fred.
Doug.
Fire away.
Based on this, your structural and building evaluations are ongoing this month. Is that what that's showing?
So the building analysis is, the building part is 2 parts really, 3 if you count Bob Powers, but he's kind of a cultural overlay, historic overlay. Is we're going to be starting surveying next week of all the buildings. We're expecting to do a combination of hand surveying with tapes and, you know, drawings of it, but also for the exterior digital surveying where they're scanned. So which could have a couple of benefits. It could lead to 3D models of these structures for marketing and outreach and describing the site, but also to get accuracy on some of the higher features. So once I get base plans, Charlie Timby, who you met in our interview, is a structural engineer who has done much of this stuff and really understands building failures. someone I very much respect. He and our team will be out there together, and we'll go through the buildings, sort of listening with his focus. And that's kind of how we're doing that process. But it starts in earnest next week, is the short answer, Fred.
Okay, good. And where do you feel you are in terms of outreach to the stakeholders, so to speak, that you've already mentioned? Are there others?
So I'm kind of visualizing we'll be on site with different experts, and some of the interviews that we had with the stakeholders was, would anybody mind if while we're there doing our thing, we spend some time, having sub conversations, on different focuses. I do expect that and welcome that. I think that's a good thing. I think if I'm aware of the situation, to speak with the ad hoc committee at large, it has to be, a quorum and advertised. And so I'm kind of visualizing almost stakeholder level discussions on different focuses, I guess, to get while we're surveying. I'm not sure that's what you were asking. I think the public outreach per our current contract is primarily through these public meetings, and then through the top committee discussions. Am I dancing around the question, or am I close to what you were looking for?
Yeah, that's fine. I just wondered if there were any other specific individuals or groups that you had planned to talk with.
I suspect that we'll be talking to almost each of the of the stakeholders. Certainly Bet will be talking to you again. Steve Klein and Joe both had an interest in continuing to talk about historical significance. The group that I haven't met with, and I was hoping someone from that group maybe could overlap when I'm there, maybe with Bob Powers, the preservationist, is the Patterson Farm. Is it Patterson Farm Preservation?
Preservation, yeah. I think
So,
there were two identified stakeholders that we invited to the meetings
and a document was sent.
that you did not have an opportunity to meet with. The Patterson Farm Preservation was one. Jeff Herco, take note of that. That should happen still. That needs to happen still. And also the Lower Makefield Environmental Advisory Committee.
Yes.
Kevin represents them on this group of stakeholders. Those were the two stakeholders that I recall that were not that we could not schedule that day you were in. So I would keep those two on your list and try to check them off.
Maybe what we can do is when Bill Collins, I'll get the dates that he's coming out to the site. He's the landscape architect, the person that then pointed out to me when we first started this, that it's all about the land and the soil, that when he's on site, perhaps an overlap could happen with that group. And
yeah, that would be appropriate if you could synchronize on that. And a related question, I know you've talked to Bill Collins about as a landscape architect, but right now, as your team has looked at this, I'm under the impression, correct me if I'm wrong, that you don't see that we're going to run into incompatibility between putting some of these unused buildings into use and maintaining a smooth agricultural operation on the land. That we can manage the site in a way to avoid disturbing or interfering with, maybe is a better word, the agricultural production with some non-agricultural uses of the buildings. Is that a fair statement from what you've seen so far?
yes, in fact, one of the main reasons I wanted Simone Collins on board was so that we be sure that whatever we think about on the reuse of these buildings, that it doesn't conflict with the agricultural use and the easements, which is a key mission, but also the allows for, in the best way, when you take the next steps for the public's enjoyment of this property. I mean, I envision this, even though this isn't a park master plan, that the steps we take will allow the township to do a park master plan, and they don't look back at it and say, too bad we didn't have a planner / landscape person who really understands these things advising them when they came up with these recommendations. So I'm trying to lay the groundwork that you don't have to backtrack.
Great, thank you.
Doug, this is Joe. Several members of the Historical Commission are interested in meeting with Bob when he's on site. So I'll send you an email, but if you please let me know when he'd have the opportunity to meet. We want to make sure that he has all the information that we have with regards to the history of the building.
So he has, and it's great the amount of information that exists. I asked him this week, Joe, to get us his schedule when he's coming out there, and I think I want that to happen. Was going to let you and Jim and others know when that's happening. I don't have his dates yet, but we have a fairly short timeline until our task 1 public meeting, which is late May, I think, isn't it? It's May 22nd, and that's a tentative for you all to tell me when that should really happen and what time of day. But yeah, that'll be great. It'll be a couple trips probably, Joe. It's a short answer.
All right, good, thanks. And the other, with regards to that public meeting, we're looking at the schedule. It says 5/22. Have you thought about when you would announce that and how we would do the outreach to people? I'm
assuming that, to me, the two things I need feedback on tonight are really those pairs of dots I have on this chart between should I be presenting to you all at large at these monthly meetings? And if so, how soon thereafter do we do a public meeting? How's it advertised? I assume that is all happening through you all and Jim to, I kind of prepare for it, present them, but I don't know how to do the outreach and schedule them best for your community. So I was hoping others would actually schedule that and announce.
In terms of our regularly scheduled monthly public meetings, I think, Doug, you should have that on your calendar and presume that you will be presenting at each one between now and completion.
Yes.
The public meeting that you have on the calendar for May 22nd, I think we need to work with both the township and the subcommittee on community outreach to shore that up and be sure that we're well prepared for that, and that there's adequate publicity and notification and awareness of that meeting.
And that was just
so that I think falls on us, on the committee, on the ad hoc property committee, as well as the township, to coordinate and be sure we get that word out. If that is the date. I know that's the date on your calendar, but ultimately we'll have to we'll have to pick a date that's gonna work, obviously.
It's a Monday, it's a random date. I agree. Right. So since it's pretty nearby, we should start focusing on that one, and maybe these happen consistently.
We will. Steve, looks like you.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in with a couple of thoughts. This public meeting venue might be a real critical issue. We can have it at the township building and have 10 people show up, but I'm a little more interested in developing public interest as well as having public input, where we can get support behind any effort, because if it's a big number, it's going to be something, I don't know anything about it, I'm going to vote it down. So if there's something that's going on there that we can get, maybe put up a tent and have the meeting on site. The Art Center does similar kinds of things, and if we did that kind of thing by the barns and had it well advertised, whether it's at the beginning of the process or in the middle of the process, I don't know if I'd wait till the end of the process, but it would be something that we might consider as part of that outreach that Fred was describing, that we might need some kind of information that gets out there, and the information might include, kind of background, history of the place, and have some experts, certainly the architect and his team, have maybe somebody come from the state museum commission and talk about other projects that have happened, and have an evening of maybe even with refreshments, like an ice cream social or something. That, in other words, community awareness development as well as information development. Thank you.
I certainly agree with that sentiment, Steve. I think generating interest is critically important. It's one thing to say, let's get input and get ideas, but people need to understand what the issues are, understand the magnitude of them, understand what the opportunities are, and become involved and become interested and be willing to support an activity or to get involved and become friends of whatever. It's that type of community interest, I think, that we'll need to support the kind of investment that I know we all realize we're looking at. We need that interest. Otherwise, it's going to be hard for the township to justify the expenditures if the community seemingly doesn't care. And I don't believe that's the case, but I do believe of the 33,000 residents in Lower Makefield Township, there's a big number of them that haven't given a thought to Patterson Farm, and that's unfortunate, but it's the case. And I think we need to try to improve that situation.
Hey, Dennis, Jeff Herco.
Yes.
Patterson Farm Preservation Group would gladly meet with Doug at the farm when he sets up the meeting.
Okay. Great. Okay.
Trips out. Jim, you and I spoke about when I need to come out there. I'll let you know. I'll try to develop a visit schedule with myself and others on our team and just share it through you primarily, and you'll share it to whoever needs to know, or what do you guys recommend?
I think that would be a good approach, and that way we know who's coming and going, and we can kind of get everyone in while you guys can still get along with your work.
Yeah, I think Doug, if you keep Jim Majewski, myself, and Fred Childs and Jennifer kind of in the loop of your calendar when you're on site,
Sure.
Then if there's an appropriate session, side session, or primary session that we can build in, what one of us will think of that, and it's more apt to happen.
What we might do on a given day, like Bob Powers Day or Bill Collins Day, might have more than one, is do an itinerary for that day and choose a time, so that, like, say at 1 o'clock, or maybe we even we generally take a lunch break on these things, so we conceivably could have it be a lunch meeting so that it could be a little more free-flowing conversation.
Right.
Some of it might be we have to look at a building together, but it's just a thought.
Nothing wrong with talking Patterson Farm over a pizza at D-Lo's. So it's awful close.
Yes.
Easy to do, right?
It's good pizza. I'm a fan.
Okay. Thanks for that, Jeff. I appreciate that. Other comments, questions, concerns for for Doug. There's a lot of work rolling down the pipe here. Okay. Hearing none. Doug, I appreciate your being here, and if you can, if you're able to stay on for the rest of the meeting and maybe be here for the public comment portion, that would be great. If you're able, if you can, I understand.
Part of success is getting to know you all, so that's what I'll do.
Okay. All right. Let me come back to the agenda. If I could, let me share screen. Sorry, I'm not real adept at manipulating Zoom, but I'll get better. At least that's my hope. The other item that we wanted to touch on is I skipped over is a fiscal responsibility. And I think it's important that we at least begin this dialogue. And I'd like to kick it off this way. As anyone who has been following this for the last year knows that part of our presentation of our recommendations, this committee's recommendations, last March, March of 22, was this circle of trade-offs that need to be made, and these are our guiding principles: that we preserve history and we preserve agriculture, that we achieve community use and community support, and that's basically what Steve was pointing to: get that community interest so you can get that support, and to be fiscally responsible. That last one is very easy to say, but it's completely undefined. And what is fiscally responsible for in one person's eyes can be completely different in another, obviously. So since we're walking down this analytical path and looking at these alternatives, it's important as we have these discussions that we begin to be sure we have some common terminology so that we're actually communicating and discussing things in a meaningful way and not talking past each other and maybe not realize that we are. So common language, common terminology is very important. So just to kind of put our toe in that water, if you will, what we worked on is a paper that we're sharing with the Board of Supervisors and others to try to define what what we think is part of the being fiscally responsible. But importantly, if at the end of the day, the Board of Supervisors need to make investment decisions and make these decisions based on a well-articulated plan, what do they see as fiscally responsible? So just to begin some terminology, the expenses that are what we're looking at to maintain, to repair and maintain the buildings in Patterson Farm, which is amongst our goals. There's three kinds of costs, just to put it out there and be sure we're all clear on it. There's the project cost, and those are the upfront capital improvements that are necessary to make the building compatible with its intended use. And it's independent of whether the work is preservation work, rehabilitation work, reconstruction, restoration. That doesn't matter. It's the upfront improvements that are necessary to make the building compatible with its intended use. Completely fictitious example, but just to make the point. Improvements of, let's say, $650,000 are needed to make the XYZ main barn structurally sound, for the storage of straw and farm machinery by the farmer. That could be the Satterthwaite barn, that could be the Janney barn. And I don't know what that number is, but that upfront investment that to make the building compatible with its intended use is what we call the project cost. Those are all upfront. That's going to be the big nut. And it's hard to imagine that there will be a use that will necessarily provide a financial payback, a return on investment of the project cost. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The second category of cost are CapEx, cap expenses. Those are the expenses that are ongoing that are needed to keep a building in a state compatible with its intended use, and to maintain the buildings and its structures. These are ongoing, long-term depreciable costs, usually a lifespan of greater than 3 years. We know, for example, if you may need a new roof every 20 years on a shingle roof. You may need a new HVAC system every 12 or 15 years. Those are ongoing capital costs. Typically, in building a budget for a facility or a building, those would be accrued for on an annual basis. You're not spending $20,000 on a new roof every year. You're spending it every 20 years. So there may be $1,000 annual accrual that to allow for that eventuality. The CapEx costs are another cost that ultimately will be the cost to the building owner. And then third are the operating costs, obvious ongoing operating expenses, utilities, cutting the grass, garbage services, cleaning services, etc. That would include small maintenance items, changing a light bulb, something a maintenance man would do, clearing a drain, replacing a window pane. These are ongoing operating costs, as well as small improvements, in painting some interior walls, replacing a door, etc. Again, fictitious example, the annual operating expenses of the Janney farmstead, to cut the grass and do all those things, $40,000 a year. I don't know that number. I'm just saying these are the categories of costs when we talk about fiscal responsibility that the responsible building owner has got to look at and say, what are going to be my project costs? What are my ongoing CapEx costs? What are my ongoing operating costs? How much of those costs can I have covered by this new intended use? Name the use. Name whether it's a tenant or it's a community group. This is where we need to understand what fiscal responsibility is. As I was starting to say, it's going to be hard to imagine any of these buildings are going to give a payback to the township in terms of profitability by covering not only the ongoing operating costs, not only the ongoing CapEx costs, but also cover the upfront project costs and the investment. That's probably not likely. And that's why we're talking about the need for the township in this community to potentially spend a lot of money up front. If there are those uses, great. God bless us. They'll be welcomed with open arms. But that's probably not likely. And then beginning with this terminology on the expense side, we'll also develop some models on the income side and covering these costs and work through some of that with the township, because I think it's important when I look at Doug and the kind of work that his team is doing in engineering and estimating and looking at potential uses, that we don't come up with a plan that in the eyes of myself or someone else seems fiscally responsible, and then we take it to the Board of Supervisors and they say, what? We can't possibly do that. So we need to kind of migrate these projects together to be sure we're going to end up with something that is implementable, that we can execute. So these discussions of fiscal responsibility and what that means is part of that process that we can run in parallel to all the engineering, architectural work that's going on, so that hopefully these different forces to preserve agriculture, preserve history, accomplish community use and support, and fiscal responsibility at the end of the day, which is maybe September 20 or maybe some other date, can come together and merge. And I just wanted to kind of get that conversation out there, and get that dialogue going, and welcome any and all input and comments and on this, because it's a big topic and there's no one right answer. But I think it's time we get that conversation going, because pretty soon we're going to be talking about analysis and there'll be dollar signs in front of it, and we need to have some reasonable expectations on all sides of this big round community government table we're sitting at. Comments, questions, concerns?
One comment right away. I wasn't at the meeting and I didn't watch it, but the supervisors meeting last night, I was told, had a comment by, who was it? The supervisor. One of Joe, yes, Mr. Lewis stood up and said, I got my assistant. Thank you, Helen. John Lewis said, well, we're going to have a lot of problem with the farm because there's not going to be any possibility of use for anything else except agriculture under the stipulations of the preserve that went in. So I think everything to me is either zoning or some other kind of law that governs things. And it seems to me that paperwork can be changed, but we have to start thinking about it now. If one of the things that starts coming out of the discussions with our consultants is that we have a real need to have other sources of income, like maybe have a blacksmith shop or something like that, that really is not agricultural in this case, but it might be demonstrated, and it might have for sale some of the goods that are made by the blacksmith. If that kind of thing actually happens, to have it blown away by a piece of legislation or an agreement by the county and the township and the state that is going to be preserved is going to get in the way. We need to start thinking about that as we develop the plans, and maybe get some legal consultant on board to have some consideration of what the process is that we'd have to go through.
Well, I did not hear, I did not observe yesterday's meeting, and I didn't hear that comment. And Fred, maybe Wise, maybe you want to comment, but it is my clear understanding, and we can confirm this, that the agricultural easement does not apply to those buildings. The land that is under agricultural easement, some 180 there. Thank you. Is that Jim Majewski? That I'm sure that's you putting it up.
Yes, and that area is not quite right. It's an approximate area. I believe it's 183 acres.
But that orange shaded area, and this is a map I've seen before, is the Patterson Farm, the preserved farmland element. That the area with the buildings is not part of the preserved farmland. So I think this little orange area between Mirror Lake Road and the buildings, that is not preserved either. I don't think. I think that orange shading might be inaccurate here, but I don't know. It doesn't matter. the area today where the leaf recycling is and all the buildings are not constrained by that agricultural easement. So I don't have that same concern, Steve.
The goals of the committee that you stated earlier tonight is spot on. Whatever use that the committee ends up recommending to the Board of Supervisors, I'm sure will be in line with the spirit of those goals. And I don't know what Mr. Lewis was talking about, because even agricultural restriction, zoned agricultural land has a number of other uses other than farming. Case in point is Shady Brook Farm. So I'm not too concerned about what ends up, with this committee's stewardship. I don't worry about what's going to be the recommendations, because I know that these goals will be met. Yeah. So it's one of the least concerns I have. Fiscal responsibility, though, is one of my major concerns. And over the course of this process, I'm sure we'll be able to gel that, make it concrete for everybody to be approved of.
We want to know how big your purse is, Fred.
Well, I'll give you a little secret. All right.
It won't be for long.
I'll give you a little secret. It won't be for long. Is we seriously underestimated our bond fund, which is reserved for projects. So we were, and the township manager is listening in, so he can have a heart attack if I give something up prematurely. But I'm going to do that because there's been a lot of social media attention to this farm and what we're doing. So, and I did mention it already at a board supervisor meeting, so it's not a secret really. Is that we thought we had $3.5 million in the bond fund. Well, that number is wrong by almost 70%. We have about $9 million in the bond fund, and that's restricted. The use of that money is restricted to projects, capital projects. It'll be up to the board of supervisors to figure out how to spend it. The more we use of the bond fund, the less we have to worry about sewer sale proceeds, and we can end up protecting more of that money. So with that kind of pocketbook filled to that level of dollars, I think we can be a little hopeful that when it comes to the project costs, if my colleagues agree on the board, that a large portion of those project costs will be borne by the bond fund. Since taxpayers are already paying for it, it won't cause any stress to the taxpayer. As we figure out what these actual costs are, it'll determine what, where we're going to get, if it's more than $9 million, or if other projects need to be considered outside of Patterson Farm, then we'll have to deal with other methods of getting the project costs taken care of. Capital expenses and operating expenses, that's more in line with how the master plan is going to be developed. But I think we have an excellent group of members on this committee that will lead us to a great recommendation when the time comes.
Thank you, Fred. We appreciate that insight, and we certainly know that there is, as an old economist, I know one thing for sure: there's no such thing as extra money. The $10 worth the same amount as the fifth and the same amount as the first. So there's no change there, but we appreciate that insight. Thank you.
Dennis, a question.
Yes.
With regards to how we get to those numbers, it's my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that the project costs will be estimated by by Doug, and perhaps also the CapEx costs on that. But we'll have to estimate what the ongoing operating costs will be, or just trying to understand how we're going to get to the final numbers.
Well, yet when you say that the project costs will be estimated by Doug, yes and no, and Doug, please weigh in here, but they'll be in a position to estimate the costs necessary for a use that we propose. So we're influencing that, because if we said, well, we want a use of one barn and the project cost of that alone is $4 million, but then there's another use of the barn and the project cost of that is $400,000, we might end up recommending the 400,000 and
Understood.
Yeah. Okay. But Doug, you can give us those, and I forget the term that Jennifer used on the estimate of the project cost, but it was, I think, better than ballpark, but it was
the order of magnitude.
Thank you. The order of magnitude. Because you can't have the detailed cost until you have all the specs and decide what color tile or all that kind of thing. But the order of magnitude. Thank you. Yeah,
I think this process, when we get to the end of it, we'll be able to answer that first cost, Joe. That's what I envision, and it's based on the uses that come out of this dialogue. It is possible, it's not in our current scope, but to estimate I forget what you called it exactly, Dennis, but the ongoing CapEx, where we've done that, where it's based on sort of the life cycle of major components like your boiler, your roof, your windows. You can do something along those lines to guesstimate what that would be.
Right.
And but yeah, I think that the short answer to your question, Joe, is the first line of Dennis's categories comes from our report, which is based on uses and what it takes to accommodate those uses.
Okay, thank you, Doug.
Other discussion? I love this because we're already using those terms, and I think everybody knows what they mean. That's that's helpful.
Hey, Dennis, Jim Majewski here. I was wondering if we could just circle back to that tentative date of May 22nd. Does anyone think that makes sense? Obviously, we'll have to confirm space availability and all that stuff, but does sometime that week, the week before Memorial Day, kind of makes sense to everybody?
Oh, there's one footnote on that, Jim. Todd Poole is going, I believe, to Europe or something on the 24th. So I chose, now that I think about it, it was a random date, but not completely random, in that I wanted it to not be the night before he leaves, but I wanted to give our task one as much time as possible. It could creep into the end of the week before, but we certainly shouldn't go after the 22nd.
Thank you.
Or kick it back another whole week or so, which is possible. I don't know his exact dates, but he leaves on the 24th, and he's really almost the most important presenter, or a very important presenter that night.
And I'm presuming, I don't know if there's any, we'll have to do some analysis on the best. I mean, it's a Monday. We're talking about a Monday night. I mean, is there logic to doing it on a Sunday night or a Saturday night? Or I'm not done these types of things before, and I don't know if there's some experience that says if you really want wide participation, this is the best time to do it. I'm open to any and all thoughts on that.
We could ask Bill Collins his opinion, but if it's the week, if Monday nights are bad, then it probably means the Thursday, Wednesday of the week before. And I don't know when you have zoning meetings, supervisory, I don't know where that falls in your schedule. I'm sure there's a lot of regularly scheduled township meetings, Jim.
Yeah.
I think that night is probably typically free. So, but I will confirm that. or we could free it up. Either way.
Thanks. Okay, thanks, Jim. Yeah, we'll have to put some heads together on all of that. Okay.
I had a question for the committee, if it's okay, Dennis, to throw it out there.
Please.
So I'm curious, just in my getting to know your community and township better, but is there a building or a place that like people, you know, generally consider like sort of the icon or the sort of central place or sort of identity making building or place in your township? An example of one that on a project I'm working on is in Rose Valley. There's the Rose Valley Museum. The township owns this site. It was a private artist home, and it's really turned into a Rose Valley museum that it's the community's rallied around. But I was curious to know if there's already someplace like that, or if there's something that's an identifier that, you know, that if it's missing, is it possible that Patterson Farm could help fill that, or is Patterson Farm that already?
I think the silence probably answers your question. There isn't such a site that comes to my mind.
Well, I'll have to say, in just researching the site, somewhere I saw it in one of the bits of information, it referred to Patterson Farm as the most photographed location in your township. And just driving there in the morning, the couple times I've come there, when the sun's falling on those buildings, it's extraordinary. So it might be one of the intangible rallying cries for, you know, investing in this site is its potential to be, you know, a placemaker for the community.
Yeah, that has certainly been a topic of conversation. It's not that today. Could it be? I believe it could be. But today the other than you know, the Jenny buildings that are used by AOY and the other artists, the public doesn't go there. It's an active farm and abandoned buildings. So I'd like to have it become that, but it won't be that for a May meeting.
Oh, for sure.
Where are we having the ice cream social? I heard that, Steve. Come on.
Yeah.
Be nice to have an open house and people can,
Yeah,
you know, walk around. Ice cream is a good draw.
I like it. Any other topics? Let's I'd put this under the heading of other business. Is there any other business from the committee, our consultants, or our stakeholders before we go to public comment? Okay. Hearing none, why don't we move on to the public comment period? I'd ask our Zoom organizer, do we have any public comments?
Yes, so we have 2 public comments right now.
Okay, and I'd ask our participants to please give your name and address for the record.
Okay, Kathleen, you're with the committee.
Hello.
We're not hearing you.
Hello?
Yes.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi. Kathleen Herco, 1450 Jolington Road. Sorry, I was been on hold for a while and I couldn't hear the meeting, so I apologize. So I just want to say that I've continually followed the meetings, and I've done some of my own posting on social media, not the township site, obviously, but the local site that has about 11,000 members. And I'm surprised but not surprised that many residents, they know nothing about what is happening with the ad hoc or the master plan. I know it's not an official page, but it does reach a lot of people. And people had a lot of ideas and concerns. And I think that we should engage the public sooner rather than later. You know, May, I guess, isn't too far off, but I really think we have to get the word out about what's happening. A lot of people don't follow the township page. I found that out through my post. Many people asked me how to watch the meeting tonight, and asked, you know, how to get the link, how to watch it. And I really think that these meetings, in my opinion, should be in person. You might engage a lot more people. I know I have trouble calling in. When I call in, I can't listen to the meetings, and you know, I don't know when they're going to bring me into the breakout room. I can't participate, or I can't, you know, hear what's going on in the meetings. And I think the community has some great ideas just through my post. A lot of ideas that they'd love to get out now. I mean, bird groups, garden groups, agricultural groups, and teaching opportunities, and photography groups. There's so many ideas people have, and they want to use the farm. So I think now is the time to engage the public. I also have a question. In the beginning of the meetings, the committee talked about the cottage on the farm, how it's the oldest structure on the farm, and the committee talked about possibly relocating the artist that's in there now and bringing the cottage back to its original state. And I was wondering if where that went. That I think would be a great thing for people to come and see and learn about, and learn about the history of the farm. So I was just wondering if what happened with those discussions.
Well, thank you, Kathleen. Certainly engaging the public is important. With regard to the cottage, when the ad hoc committee was making developing its recommendations, there was discussion about alternative. Does it make more sense for the cottage to become a house museum versus a artist studio, or are there other opportunities for an artist studio? And at the end of the day, the recommendations from the committee at that point in time simply could not get that granular. And you've seen the broad stroke recommendations that were made, and amongst those recommendations, it said, do a detailed analysis, develop a master plan with alternative uses for each building and the cost estimates. And so that's what we're doing now. So that some of the thoughts and ideas that were being kicked around in the early stages, it's not that those thoughts and ideas aren't still there. They're just they're still perking through, and now we want to work through it in more detail with the architectural consultants and see what the best recommendations are. At the end of the day, the committee was not in a position at that stage in March of 22 to make kind of granular building by building specific recommendations like that. So
okay. Well, I just want to say I like the idea of maybe putting up a tent on the farm and having the residents come for a meeting at the farm. There's really no good place in the township to have something like that, but that might draw a lot of people. And I can tell you there are a lot of people that don't know about it, but the ones that do are very passionate, as I am, about being able to use the farm for the residents.
Good, good. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. For those of you who are wondering, Kathleen is Jeff Herco's wife. Jeff is on the call. So, next caller.
Helen, you're in the room with the committee now.
Hello.
Hello. Is this the meeting?
Yeah, you're in the meeting, Helen.
Yes. Hello, Mr. Stedman. How are you?
Very good. Just for the record, your name and address, please.
Dr. Helen Hines, 1355 Edgewood Road, Lower Makefield.
Thank you.
I have not met the architect yet, but I am concerned about, of course, the history and the archaeology at Patterson Farm, since it's been farmed since 1682 by Quakers and various other people. I wanted to ask if there was any allowance in this project for dealing with the underground sites that are there on the Patterson Farm. By that I mean the ruins of the house on Mirror Lake Road, the various septic tanks and wells, the various other buildings that were adjacent to buildings and demolished within the last 20 years.
Certainly the septic tanks and wells and all of that is, I know, well within the scope of the project.
That's good news.
I don't, Doug, maybe you want to comment. I don't know of the scope of archaeological sites of older buildings.
Yes, hi Helen, look forward to meeting you on one of our trips up there. Our scope doesn't, it's not, we're not doing any archaeological investigations in our scope. That said, our work's also not going to be disturbing anything that's there either. I do think that I'm hoping to learn from conversations with you and maybe others, to point out remnants, little bits of evidence in the landscape that might suggest some of this, very early history that's of so much interest to Bill Collins, and to Bob Powers. So, yeah, I think we aren't doing archaeological works. I know on some sites that we've been involved in, they've done archaeological work with students and volunteers. If they don't have money for professionals, it usually takes a long time for that to happen. But an example is the Speaker's House in Trapp, I think it is.
Right.
It's amazing what they're finding out there. And then, the artifacts that turn up become some of the story that engages the community. And so it's, I think since the site is so old, and sure, it's been disturbed, but it's relatively, and maybe you'll tell me it's wildly disturbed, you had in your mind, but it seems to the casual observer now, it's relatively intact, that being very careful as this goes forward, not so much this report, which is, that be, and I think we will note it in our narrative to be aware of that. So I'm glad it's an important part of it.
The other part of this is the house along Mirror Lake Road was last occupied by an African-American family. And a lot of my research has shown that actually both these farms that were there there were actually two farms that were joined together by Mr. Patterson. But separately, they both had African-American workers and probably had one of those families living in that tenement house that was removed about 1964 on Mirror Lake Road. So that would be a wonderful archaeological site going forward, and certainly of interest to the PHMC. Second thing is the two former National Register nominations failed for a variety of reasons, not the least of which was the inaccurate data that was used, but also the failure to connect this farm to the historic district of Edgewood Village. And I'm trying to correct that. And also to put it in context with the entire history of the development of more modern agriculture in southeastern Pennsylvania. And that is of national significance, so hopefully that will also help in the National Registry process. And finally, I guess the most astonishing thing was to think from the presentation tonight that buildings must generate income. And I think that going forward, we have to really look at whether that's necessarily true or whether their being there generates income for all of us. Because you mentioned the fact that the peaceful facade of that farm as you get off 295 is, I think, worth every penny that we pay for it. So thank you, Fred. I hope you can consider using some of that $9 million to buy the other farm across the street, which apparently is going up for sale, Torbert property, and continue keeping farming part of our continuing history in Lower Makefield. Thank you, guys. Good night. Thank you.
It is the case that there's less and less farmland, and it makes this farm all that much more special. That being said, what I think we don't want to do moving forward is make the drastic mistake of inaction. That's oftentimes the biggest mistake one can make, is inaction. And that's in large measure why we are where we are, why we have to start the meeting with the definition of a problem. It is a problem, or this meeting wouldn't be going on. So we need to take action. We are at a crossroads, and inaction would be a bitter failure in my book, speaking for only myself, because inaction is just going to result in the further deterioration and the continued abandonment of these buildings. That would be a mistake. So, all right. Are there any other public comment?
So we have two more, and Donna
Okay.
is here right now with you guys.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. It's Donna Dunn, 2814 Langhorne Yardley Road, Langhorne. And I just want to say I am very encouraged by what I hear tonight. It seems like it's been such a long struggle to raise the profile of Patterson Farm, and I'm so grateful that Doug is here and his team and everyone seems to be working together to get a better understanding and see a path forward. So with that in mind, I just wanted to make a suggestion for the May meeting. If you're having a presentation to the public, I'd like to reiterate my request to have Doug Wolfgang from the Farmland Preservation Board in Harrisburg come and speak to the public and let them know the opportunity for that $456,000 in funding, approximately, for the 38 acres that are not yet protected. So, I mean, that's an opportunity that the public needs to be aware of, and I think that they will embrace it. This is an opportunity for us to not only preserve this farm that's been farmed for 340 years, but take the opportunity to plan ahead for the future generations that will follow us. So with that in mind, I wanted to give the information the contact information to the committee for Doug Wolfgang. His direct number is 717-783-3167. And I just wanted to also say to Doug's suggestion of a gathering place, I wanted to cheer because Satterthwaite House is exactly the place for that, for the Patterson Agriculture and Heritage Center. That's exactly what we had in mind, a gathering spot where people could come and appreciate nature, the heritage, the wildlife. We have trying to reintroduce the kestrel, which is an important farmland raptor. People do like to have wildlife around them and support wildlife, and that's the perfect spot to do it. So there's not only just the wonderful agrarian history and the cultural history, but also the wildlife and the indigenous component. I wanted to just make sure that that's not forgotten because we have evidence of that on site. There should be a display of some kind, perhaps at the Patterson Agri and Heritage Center that could inform the public. And we are only 10 years away now from the Patterson Farm 350th anniversary. So as America gets ready to celebrate America 250, we can get ready to celebrate Patterson Farm 350, which is awesome. So bearing all that in mind, thank you for listening to my comments and have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Donna. Other public comments? We have another caller.
So, Laura, you are now in with the committee.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello, you're in the,
Hi.
you're in the room.
Thank you. This is Laura Tarantino, 185 in Newtown. I wanted to mention to Mr. Seller that idea that he was saying, what is the image or a gathering spot? And while everyone said there isn't one technically yet, I do remember very distinctly that this, the Patterson Farm being called the iconic gateway to Lower Makefield Township. I know the area, having been visiting my sister who lived in Yardley for 25 years, and that was the pivotal site to see. And that's how it came to be known to myself. I loved the idea of the tent on site. I think that would be a great thing, and maybe the ideal time is in the middle of this process. It gives people some idea to get familiar, and then the looking forward point for everyone to actually be on site. I think that would be exciting. And the third thing is, I remember in the early days of the ad hoc committee meetings, there was talk of the other farms in Bucks County being administered through the Bucks County Farm Bureau, but that Patterson was distinct and was being managed by the township on its own. So that made me think, I don't know what those farms within that collection in the Farm Bureau do, what their outreach is to the community, but for Lower Makefield, with the opportunity to make a very distinct footprint in your area, should draw upon things that would distinguish it from all the farms. And maybe it is playing to the history of the Quakers and the history of that element on the African American side, and also history of the agriculture since it's 320 some years coming. I think that makes it distinctive. But why would you want to repeat if there are components already in existence in the Farm Bureau collection within Bucks County when you have a chance to be a standout? And I'm excited to watch this process and see and learn more that will come to pass. So thank you very much. It's a late hour. I will end my call. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. And yeah, and just to remind everyone, I know that the calendar, the project timeline, the font was quite small. The tentative May 22nd public meeting was public meeting number 1. There are 3 public meetings in that calendar, if I'm not mistaken, Doug. So it's not one and done, and it's not, only early, only late. There are 3 public meetings in that schedule right now, which all have to be confirmed.
Fourth is a final presentation, Dennis.
That's
First
true.
call.
That's true. The 4th.
Dialogue, but
Yeah. No, yeah, good point. So it won't begin and end on May 22nd if that is the final date. And I also love the idea of having it on site if that's doable. But logistics and safety and parking and it also has to be done right. So we'll look at the best way to do that and come back with that. Any other? Bet, our trusted secretary, action items, follow-ups. Just let's be sure we capture those for the night.
Sure, we have report from the Outreach and Engagement Subcommittee about a township letter to neighbors to let them know what's going on. Continue to develop a survey in the subcommittee that FAQs are being developed and will be posted. And then there's the lowermakefield.org Patterson Farm site that people should go to. And then something about an ice cream social, which we'll have to work on.
Well,
in terms of the project plan has been revised by Doug. I guess that's going to get posted on the site as well. Yes, Jim, I'm sure it will. And then we're working on timing and that they're going to be coming out to the farm and doing architectural surveys in the next couple of weeks. Anything else?
Any other items that didn't capture? I know I have one comment on the ice.
Yeah, go ahead.
Scream social as someone who attended numerous rancher meetings where you try to get these ranchers together out in Australia. And they're not ranchers, they're graziers. If you want to get a meeting of Australian graziers, there's a strong rule of thumb that everybody knew. One, if you want them to come, you got to give them food. If you want them to listen, you got to give them drink. And that was always the rule of thumb for an Australian grazier. Now I know we're in Lower Makefield, but I don't know. Some rules might apply. Anything else? No.
We have one more public comment.
Oh. Please state your name and address, please, for the record. Emily, you're in the room.
Oh, hi. My name is Emily Hiller. I live at 886 Mirror Lake Road in Yardley. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, great. I will be quick because I know it's super late. Really appreciate everything y'all have been doing. We've been watching the ad hoc meetings for, I think, over a year now. I have a really small comment, and maybe it's too early to even bring this up, but I know there's a lot of public interest in like the immediate area. I live in one of the farmhouses across from Patterson Farm. I know folks are like interested and excited about what's happening. I was going to say, is there a point, I think something that's missing is folks in our area have been like discouraged from even like using, like you can't walk by it. There's no sidewalk. I know folks have been like yelled at for walking on the path. It's not public. And so I think one thing that would probably garner some public interest, if there's any way to even have a sidewalk to walk by it. Right now I've seen just from like my house, seen a lot of people like drive up and like sneak photos of the farm, but I know people tend to like walk in the street on Mirror Lake because there's no sidewalk and there's no shoulder. Even with strollers, it stresses me out because I see it all the time. And so if there's any possibility to include like a walking path or a sidewalk, I think that would really appease a lot of folks just because there's a bike path right past the farm on both sides actually of Mirror Lake, but there's nothing that allows people to actually walk by it, which tends to just cause a lot of like friction. And I've seen people literally walking in the road, and it stresses me out. So if there's any part of this plan that includes, I know it's not a parks plan, but if there's any part where we can think about walking paths or a sidewalk to connect the bike trail, I would be so thrilled. And I know a lot of my neighbors would as well. I don't know if that's in the works or if that's something I should bring up later in a future meeting. I just wanted to say it, but I don't want to take up too much of your time. So that's all I was going to say.
No, thank you for that, Emily, and thank you for following these meetings. Yeah, and what you're articulating is one of the issues we want to solve. Right now, Patterson Farm is kind of off limits. It's an active farm. The buildings that are there that aren't used are literally dangerous. They're not safe. They need to be locked up. But that's part of what we want to change. We want this beautiful, precious, historic property to be accessible to Lower Makefield Township residents and neighbors like yourself. So some passive recreation, nature trail, walking trails. It's gonna be largely up to landscape architectures and those kinds of plans, etc. But I certainly hope and fully expect that those kinds of community uses will be part of an ultimate plan that will help win the support of the community for the investments that need to be made. So I really appreciate your calling to say that, because it's a negative that we want to fix.
Okay. Thank you so much. That's so great to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, it's 9:17. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Hello.
Very good. I consider both those hands a first and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Listen, just for the public's sake, everyone here is all the committee members and stakeholders are all volunteers, and I really appreciate everybody's time and energy, not just for a couple hours once a month, but all the emails and phone calls in between. So thank you all for doing it. Appreciate all your work. Good night.
Thank you, everyone.